Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about retro to results. I'm going to look at some things related to retrospectives, how to make them better, and also play around with some stuff using AI for retros. I'll leave you with a workflow. I thought I'll probably have to email it to you, but a workflow that you can play with. I'm a bit of a Luddite when it comes to AI, I think, for a lot of stuff. But I think it's interesting to kind of see things getting used, see what type of limitation thing they have, and also see what types of benefits they may have. Coming up next week, let's see, what is it? Yes, this will be next week. Dave Marsh, that's 1 p.m. Eastern time there, will be noon Central time as usual. Dave Marsh is going to be coming, he's looking at building software with AI using one thin slice at a time. And the conversations I've had with Dave have been pretty interesting because he's talking about how, from a coaching perspective, what he's doing with AI is very similar to the way that he coaches a team, including all the things that a team is likely to try to run ahead with, and you need to bring back, say, no, we're going to follow this discipline. So it should be pretty interesting, and I think it will give you some ideas of how you can take all the things that you know how to do today, and the things you know with things you're experiencing with dealing with working with real people, and say, how do we go ahead and take that knowledge and apply it in an AI environment? So that's going to be an interesting talk. I'm really looking forward to it. Hope you can come. If you know anybody on your teams that are interested, please forward the invite to them. I'd love for them to be able to join if it's something they're interested in. And then, let's see, a few weeks later, or actually the next month in March, is another one coming up. Troy McGinnis has done a lot of work with prioritization and forecasting and stuff. That's how I met him, working on a project for the Treasury, that he was doing some forecasting stuff with us. And he's going to be talking about what he's finding in terms of the way that using AI to help code changes the way that you prioritize, particularly when a story is ready to go ahead and begin on. So Troy's always got lots of great insights. So this is going to be a lot of fun. Will be very interesting. That's coming up in March. If you have those invites and anyone on your team is interested in that, please feel free to forward those around to your teams or groups of people that might be interested. We'd love to have anybody come that might get something out of it. Okay, so now let's talk about the goal of retrospectives. So I'm going to open up Slido here. This should pop up on the side of your screen, I think, or you can go to slido.com and go to this number and keep it up, because we'll be doing some things with this and then giving some stuff away at the end. So why does your team do retrospectives? Like, what's the driving reason behind why your team would do retrospectives at all? And your answer may be, we don't do them. It's because of Scrum. It's because the Agile principles say to regularly reflect. It's because Scrum makes us, or because we find them valuable. There's not a right answer here, but you may be getting different results depending on what your answer is. So yes, I've been on teams where the only reason they're doing retrospectives is because the scrum master makes them do it. Um, also been on teams where, oh, I fat fingered the word principles there, but I've been on teams where they're doing it because the agile principles say to regularly reflect, and that's not a bad reason, right? We're like this is a good practice for us to do. But the real thing that I want to kind of point out is what we really want to be getting out of our retrospectives is that the team is doing them because the team finds them valuable. If the team's not finding them valuable or doesn't think they're valuable, I know I've coached some scrum masters before that were asking me, they're like, how do I make the team think that this is valuable, think the retrospective is valuable? Because no one wants to come to retrospective, and to me, that's kind of a bad question because our goal isn't to make them think it's valuable. We want them to actually experience it being valuable. And if it's their experience of being valuable, then they will probably think it's valuable. We want to make sure we're creating the actual thing, not just trying to make them think that. So if most of us are in a situation where the team's finding the value, that is awesome. But let's look at some things and we will have some ideas of how, if your team doesn't find them valuable, how we may be able to make it more valuable to them. So everyone should find the retrospectives actually being valuable. Retrospectives should be focused on making improvements. And in particular, they need to be focused on things that are within the locus of control of the team. Here's a meme. So I'm not sure if this is a retrospective or a group of people just complaining about stuff. And you don't have to show your hands, but I bet most of us have probably experienced retrospectives that are just big complaining sessions. Nothing actionable comes out of it. Everything we're complaining about is outside of what the team can actually impact or in making changes. So there's nothing that really comes out of it. Team makeup, team members don't like to provide feedback. So that we'll look at some ways that maybe, and if you've got people that are remote, that can be a challenge. But we'll look at some ways that maybe we can get people to participate, even if they're not speaking up right now. So one thing about retrospectives is choosing wisely. And I had a conversation with something like this. I don't remember. So Richard's got a good question. Is it okay for retros to surface issues outside the locus control that need to be escalated? I wouldn't say no, that shouldn't ever happen. The problem comes if that is what the team is focused on, they may miss lots of things that they can do themselves. And so I think probably the most healthy way to do that is if there's a problem that arises, if the team's laser focused on here's the things we can do on our end, and here's some of the steps we can take to raise this awareness for what we need on the other side of things, like what we need for management or for what we need from another team. The trick is to make sure though that it's being done in a way that's actually actionable and things that we're taking responsibility for. Now, sometimes I may have this summer. I've seen situations where it's like, okay, what can we do about this problem we're having with interfacing with this other team? Let's ask the other team to join us for lunch. We'll all go out to lunch somewhere. We're still trying to impact change on the other team, but we're very focused on what we can do ourselves. So those are some ideas. So yes, Richard, you're right. We want to make sure we're not just saying, oh, we can't talk about anything that's outside of what we can control. But as a general rule, you want to make sure if people aren't finding retrospectives valuable, sometimes I've seen it be because it's all focused on things outside the team, so nothing ever really changes. Particularly things that are not only outside the team, but aren't going to change. We don't like the location of the building or whatever it is, things that aren't going to change. So this is a kind of a mock-up of something that a conversation I kind of had. So just wanted to see how the retrospective went. I said we decided to make a few improvements. That's great. We're going to focus on hours logged instead of working code. Okay. Now we're also going to stop all forms of face-to-face communication. Okay, we might want to talk about this. And the point of this is that we need to choose wisely. In this particular case, it sounds like the team chose poorly what they were trying to do. And this is where facilitating a retrospective becomes important, not necessarily telling the team what to do, but helping the team to choose wisely, to head in a direction that's going to benefit the team. So here's some examples of things chosen wisely. Like I mentioned, having a group lunch with another team you need to coordinate with. That can be a very wise thing to be chosen in a retro as a way of something you're going to do to try to make progress for. Agreements on when to escalate blockers. So if you're in a situation where we keep needing to wait on other teams or even on each other, talking through that and saying, how can we go ahead and make sure that we reduce the waiting time? Let's all agree how we're going to do this, particularly if it's all just within the team that you're trying to escalate stuff. Let's come up with a standard agreement of, or the example I can think of is, if you've got 10 things you're working on, and the top one is the highest priority, and there's things that are lower priority. Well, if the people that are working on the top priority reach a blocker that they need somebody that's working on something lower priority, the team ought to be very, very willing and very excited to drop whatever they're doing to finish that highest priority thing. If that's not happening, that type of agreement coming out of retrospective of saying we're going to prioritize the important things would be a wisely chosen thing to come out of a retrospective. Agreement on how to communicate breaking changes. I remember I was working with a team one time, and I was fixing a lot of things that weren't big deals, but kind of formatting errors and code smells in mass across the application. And it ended up inadvertently breaking stuff for a lot of people. So the retrospectives we have, maybe we should do that. Mark, before you do that, let's have this type of communication. And that was a great thing to come out of a retrospective. Another good thing, experiment for the next sprint to see if it improves flow, or decisions on to try to have a second daily stand-up. So this one sounds probably a little bit weird. I was working with a team that there were the development team and then the systems team. So the people that were actually deploying software, maintaining the servers, doing all that backups, all that type of stuff. And we were trying to really interface closely with the systems team. But what we found was there were a lot of details that were happening in the developers as they were walking through things that were making the daily stand-up a little bit less valuable for the systems team. Now, talking to them later, they were still saying it was really, really valuable. But what we ended up doing is creating another second daily stand-up. All the devs came to that as well, but it was laser focused on what we needed from systems. And some of it was even repeating stuff that we had done in the first stand-up. But it was done in a way to make sure that we were able to keep their attention for what we needed, and they didn't get bored or stop coming. I think in actuality, splitting it up like that made both of them so focused that it took less time than when we were doing them all the way straight through. But that was something that came out of a retrospective of a way to go and improve stuff. It's something within our locus control that we could change. It made life better for the people we were trying to interface with. It was a very wisely chosen thing for that retrospective. Examples of things that are chosen poorly is, if you have a retrospective and you all reach consensus that Hal, that guy from security, is an idiot. Okay, that does not benefit everything. It may even be true, but that being something that you're actually coming out of a retrospective with, that's chosen poorly. Decision to work on something other than what the customer wants without telling the customer, like without having communication. We all decide we want to do, the development team decides they want to do X and Y instead of Z that the customer wants, and we're just going to do it without telling them. That's probably chosen poorly. Agreement to stop being transparent with management or customers. So I've seen those types of things be floated. If I'm part of the retrospective, I'm usually successful in steering them away from those things. But sometimes it's like, oh, we experienced pain because management found out about X and Y. So we're going to try and make sure that management can't find out about X and Y in the future. Well, that would be chosen poorly. That's not what should be coming out of your retrospective, and it's likely to hurt you a lot in the future. Okay, another thing about retrospectives that I will suggest everyone try to do is have kudos. Everybody gets kudos. So every retrospective should have kudos. And this is something that I think it's easy sometimes to overlook. But if we're reflecting on how we can improve, don't overlook the opportunity to really point out when people have done things that were good. Sometimes what we need to do to improve is to really recognize what we've done that went really, really well. And in particular, what somebody did, like calling people out by name, that Joe did this and it worked really, really well. If we can do more like that, that was just extraordinary. Let's see if we can do more things like that. We celebrate people. It also gives us an opportunity to help model the team behavior and create team successes. Usually, I was in one weird situation where somebody got offended that somebody else got kudos or something that they thought they had. But for the most part, this usually is a very safe thing to do. And usually, if I'm working with a team, when we're going together putting things up for the retrospectives, usually as a coach, what I'm trying to do is saying, okay, I'll let the team worry about the stuff that we need to bring up. If there's something big, I might put up a card for it. But what I'll usually try to do is say, can I get a kudos for every single person on the team? There's something that they did that made things better to make sure that everybody's got something up there. It's not a matter of saying everybody needs to get a prize, but just the point is that people are working hard and doing things. It really makes a big difference for somebody to recognize and say, hey, this thing you did was really helpful. And the other reason for doing that is if I can model that behavior and show we're giving kudos to people, and people start seeing a list of things that we're thanking people for things, then they'll start doing their own, and we kind of kickstart that moving forward. Okay, running a retrospective. So the question, when should we do a retrospective? So how often does your team do a retrospective? Read through some of the comments here. Some good stuff. Okay, so looks like most people are doing them every 2 weeks. Um, a monthly retro is about right for some people, and there's not necessarily a right or wrong here, except for this one, probably this one right here. If the only reason you do a retro is when something really bad happens, you probably are leaving opportunities for continual improvement on the table. Um, and it's easy to get in situations where this is what's happening. We don't do a retrospective until something horrible happens. That's probably not the situation you want to be in if you can avoid it. Every 2 weeks works well for a lot of teams. Now, I was on a team one time, and so I'm an agile coach, been working with them for a few years, and I realized we hadn't done a retro for like 2 or 3 months. And I was like, oh no, we're failing. As a coach, I'm failing this team because I missed that we were doing this, but that we weren't doing retrospectives regularly. But then I started watching, and I realized that at the end of the daily stand up, somebody said, hey, I'm having a problem working with this team and interfacing this way. If anyone can help, can you stick around after the stand up, just stay on the call, and let's talk through how to do this. And the next day, somebody said, I'm having this technical problem here. I think we should do it this way, but I don't know about this, and I'm running into these issues. Can anybody that can help stick around after the stand up? Still stuff all over the place. Stick around after the stand up, and we'll help me talk through and solve this problem. And what I realized was they were doing retrospectives on as things came up. The team was very cohesive and was able to do things just as they came. Now we eventually went and did a more of a formal retrospective, and that brought some stuff to the surface that we hadn't just surfaced in the informal way it was happening. But what was beautiful about it is the team had engraved the idea of doing retrospective just into the way they work so much that even if we weren't scheduling them, they were making them happen. And I think that's a very ideal thing. And if you can encourage that in your team, that would be great. Not to replace a more formal retrospective, but that's really what we want, is to solve problems quickly. Okay, so who should attend your stand up? So this is our dog Bella. She would love to come to your stand up, especially if you have dog treats. So there's a variety of people that could potentially come to your stand up. During COVID, I saw that there was a thing where you could hire a llama to show up on your video conference for your meetings, and I think having a llama in your daily stand up would be just an awesome thing to have in there. Somebody asked about documenting the informal retrospective decisions. No, not unless the issue was something that people thought needed to document, but not on a regular basis. And I think we'll talk about that more in just a minute. So who should come to your retrospective? So who should be asked to attend the retrospective? So this should be free form. So just type it in there, the team, okay? And if you want to put somebody that you think should not be in the retrospective, put that there as well. Just we'll see what people have to say about this. I've seen some very strong opinions. Feel if invited. Actually doing the work, not the managers. Everyone that attends normal stand up. Team, no managers or higher up. Team. So my take on this is outside of Bella, because she'd love to join you on any of your stand ups, but for the most part, it really depends on how the team is doing the work. I've been in situations where there is a manager that is very integrated in the team, not necessarily in micromanaging, but in being present and trying to remove blockers. And integrated to the point that it makes perfect sense for them to be part of the retrospective because they're really providing a servant leadership type of approach to things. So in some cases, that may make a whole lot of sense. I've been in other situations where that is not what's happening, and it would be better not to have the manager as part of the meeting because it would keep people from really voicing things. I would say on a extremely healthy organization, extremely healthy team, you could probably have a lot more people, and not just quantity, but there are many more roles that would be helpful and could be really, really good than if you're in an organization where people don't feel safe speaking up. So the answer would be it depends, but like somebody put, the people actually doing the work, um, having a retrospective that's focused on the people that are going to be able to uh, that are delivering the work within the sprint, because if that's what you're trying to optimize. The other thing to think about too is you might have retrospectives at different levels depending on what you're trying to focus on. You might have a retrospective that's very focused on the dev work if that's what you're trying to optimize. But if there is a larger group that's actually involved in the not just the dev work, but the deployment and getting it all the way out there, maybe sometimes the governance around it or something, and you're wanting to improve that process, that might be there may be a different retrospective that needs to happen at that level. Okay, how long should we schedule a retrospective for? So, what do you think? How long are your retrospectives? Are they less than 20 minutes? Are they more than 20 but less than 30? And like with a lot of stuff, I'm not going to suggest that one of these is right and one of these is wrong. I will suggest if it is too short and you're doing them infrequently, you may miss opportunities for people to bring stuff up. And what can happen is if it's too short, you may end up in situations where people that have good things to contribute but aren't as loud as other members on the team may not actually contribute because it's busy enough as it is, and they're not going to try to make it busier. And so, like Mike's got a good point. If we've got through everything we need to, then we end when we're done discussing. That's absolutely great. Um, and I would hope in a lot of situations, if something is really going well and you're really, really solving stuff, that maybe if you thought it was going to take 30 minutes, it takes 45, maybe that's okay. I know when I've scheduled a lot of stuff, I'll often say, okay, we want to schedule this to take 30 minutes, but I'd like to block out 60 because if this launches other conversations, I don't want to miss that moment. Usually for other types of training and stuff, but that's also it's also a potential approach for retrospectives. So most of us are somewhere in the 30 to 60 minute range. And yes, Lisa brought up a good thing. I play max at 45, try to keep it brief to keep people engaged. So if your retrospective goes too long, what would be signs that your retrospectives are going on? Well, if you see people doing this might be a sign that your retrospective is going far too long. So you need people to be awake. A healthy retrospective probably has people walking around. If you're on in person, walking around the room, putting stuff on a board, talking, standing up, sitting down, and moving around. So there's lots of motion happening. That's why using the sticky notes is great because you've got tactile and physical moving things around the room. If you're online, it's a little bit different, but you still want to make sure that you're not, having this happen. Uh, Here's a way to make meetings go shorter, and it could possibly be retrospective. I don't actually recommend doing this, but could you imagine how focused and quick your retrospectives would be if everybody had to plank during the entire thing? I like this guy right here. He's like, he's just giving up, right? The guy in the middle there, just that's it. I'm done planking. Um, so when it comes to the how long it should be, there's not something definite, but you definitely want to make sure that people are feeling energized all the way through. You don't want to get in a situation where it just starts dragging on and on. Um, oh, somebody actually did this for a team. Okay, that's pretty. How was it for a retrospective or some other meeting, Jessica, that you had them play? Okay, they want to do it for a daily stand-up. Okay, I can see it working for stand-up. That's pretty cool. Um, So think what I would encourage you to think about when it comes to retrospective is think in terms of, is the length of our retrospective making it more or less efficient? And if it's too short to be efficient, you need to schedule more time. If it's too long to be efficient, then make it a little bit shorter. I was talking to the pastor of a large church one time and talking about the length of services, and he said if we make our service short enough that people feel like they wished it was longer, that is a much better situation to be in than people feeling like it's too long. So like we want to err on the side of it being short, so people are like, oh, this was really really good. Probably a similar thing for retrospectives, right? You want it long enough that people feel their voices heard, but not so long that they start wishing that they could go do something else. Any tips on getting engineers to talk more during retrospective? I try to encourage them, but often find myself having to prod for topics, which can result in cutting our retro short. Um, I think most people dealing with retrospectives have probably run into this in one way or another. We'll look at a few different ways of doing retrospectives, and sometimes you'll find we had Chris Stone come talk here a while back, and he does very themed retrospectives with a lot of interesting things, Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones or different things like that. And what I know some people have found is if you do something very different, you have some people that like really engage with that and speak up, but they don't for something else. I'm not as a big fan of all the effort going into trying to theme stuff, but it might not be a bad thing trying to use. The sticky notes, I think, is a good thing of spending some time getting people to write stuff down. Sometimes people will write something down that they wouldn't speak up, and once they get up on the board, then people can discuss it. Um, as far as participants not engaged or participating, I think if you have somebody on there, like as a coach, what I will do sometimes is try to ask people, in particular, based on things that I saw that happen. Like Sue, remember when this happened? Is that something we should talk about? I think this was really hard. Is this something we want to bring up? And then it helps prompt their memory and also gives them some space to talk about it or say that they're not. You just got to be careful that you're not pointing out things that would come across as a fault for the person, but rather just ways of working, not just like, you were trying to do this, and it turns out you're not a very good developer. So should we talk about that? That's not what you should be doing. Who runs the retrospective? So you may be the scrum master, a particular person outside from the facilitator. The teams I've seen, what I really like is when a team gets to a point that when you get ready to schedule a retrospective, somebody on the team says, "Oh, can I do it this time? I'd like to get some experience running a retrospective." That's the ideal situation to be in, including maybe to the point of randomly choosing people. I know with daily stand-ups, I've been on teams that we set up something in our chat channel that 15 minutes before it started, it would list three names, and the idea was the first person would do it if they were there. If they were busy, couldn't. Then second and third. We got to messing around with it one time and changed the generator so it just gave Peter's name every single time. And I can't remember how many weeks we went before he realized like this seems statistically improbable. It was a good team, so it was all good fun. Um, but one thing is say, what does it actually mean to run a retrospective? And so, okay, using a wheel of names, that's great. So, what does it mean to run a retrospective? Well, here's what you want not to have happen. You don't want a retrospective where it's saying, I've scheduled this retrospective to tell you everything you're doing wrong. Um, Actually, facilitating the retrospective should be what you guys are doing over there in the chat, saying, how do I get these people to speak up? So they might choose a particular format for what they're doing in the retrospective. They should be the one maybe asking questions, encouraging things, maybe keeping track of. Looks like we've got lots of stuff up on board. Looks like everybody's got a chance to participate. Let's go ahead and move on to discussing these things now. But you don't want this may be a good way to put it. If you have somebody that is really, really has a topic for the retrospective that they think is really, really important that they want to see addressed, that might not be the best person to have run the retrospective that week. Because everything that happens is going to be seen through their lens of what they're seeing as being a big problem. And so it might be better to have somebody else run it instead of that person so they have a chance to participate without needing to facilitate things. Because if they're trying to do both, it can sometimes get a little messy. Then you end up with situations where they may be talking over someone else because they're trying to, they've got the particular thing that they're trying to solve in their mind. So, like I said, I think it's great to have a variety of people doing it, give people experience with it. The other thing that I think can happen is by letting someone else facilitate it, it may make them better as a participant in the future. So if they're there trying to draw things out of people and getting things up to discuss, it may give them more empathy and experience that when it's their turn to just be a participant, to speak up no and more and get to experience those from both sides. What are your thoughts on having AI run the retro? Well, we actually have, at the end of this, we're going to walk through and experiment with that. My initial thought is that that's a horrible idea, but I'm trying to be a little bit more open-minded. So we'll look at that and talk about that. I'm starting to see that there may be some ways that it can help. At the same time, I'm suspicious. I was at a conference, the Software Craftsman conference here. It's an online thing here a few weeks ago. And one person was talking about some conversations with people that were using AI, and he said that he was talking to one individual who was a good developer, maybe an excellent developer. And this developer said, you know, if I'm working with stuff with languages I don't understand or in areas and techniques I don't understand, AI lets me go a lot faster, really, really fast. However, if I'm dealing with something that I'm actually an expert in, AI slows me down a lot. And so I think that's one thing to think about when looking at AI for anything is if I kind of let AI run this, what are the trade-offs I'm making? Am I losing the ability to do things that I need to learn how to do better and that I can bring an actual personal touch to? And am I giving that up, the ability for the team, like letting AI run a retrospective versus letting people go around and individuals run the retrospective? There are some benefits in terms of ownership of having the individuals run the retrospective that we may be forfeiting if we let AI run it. And there may be some ways to navigate that, but I think those are the types of things that you really need to think through of excuse me, what are we giving up? Time boxing, keep stuff moving. Some depending on how it's used, I've seen time boxing work really well. I've seen it not work well. One thing I think that's useful to think about is if there are issues and we can get some things up on the board and everybody brings, and particularly about a team that's actually engaged, we get some of that stuff on the board and start talking about it. If everybody's bringing what they feel is the most important issue, the fact that there are a bunch of other things that they could come up with probably don't matter because we may not have time to get to them anyway. And if they continue to be important, some retrospective, they will eventually rise to be the next most important thing. So you don't need every possible solution, just a reasonable idea of what you want to address next in terms of priority. When you're running a retrospective, a lot of what you're trying to do is guide constructive discussions. And in talking about people not speaking up, sometimes what you can do as a facilitator is somebody brings up one thing, saying this didn't work very well, you know, this whatever. If you can ask someone else, sometimes a good thing as a facilitator to do is say, okay, Joe, it sounds like you're saying this, you put this card up here. Tom, what do you think of that? Is that how you're seeing this too, or do you have any ideas? And actually calling people out. The trick is to make sure you're not putting people on the spot in a way that's going to keep them from speaking up. But you also want to try to open the floor for them, and asking someone to a question related to it gives them space to speak that they might not jump in. I tend to be great at jumping into conversations, you know, very dynamic, particularly online because I've done many years of working remote. But I've seen other people that have a very difficult time doing that, especially if there's somebody like me that's not being aware and is always jumping into the empty space. So a facilitator that's asking someone to speak up can sometimes help bring out voices that might not otherwise. Getting people to engage, like we were talking about, I'm asking for input to give people a chance to talk. You're basically giving them a chance at the floor, even if they say, "Yeah, I don't know," if they don't have anything to say, they at least had an opportunity that they didn't have to try to jump into something. One big thing is to making sure you're not allowing attacks. We're not worried about who was involved in something. We're learning about how to improve the process and making sure that no one's presenting things that they think need to be improved in a way that's targeting another individual in the room. It's about how and healthy teams get to the point where that's not as big a deal. But if you've got teams that don't really trust each other yet, it can be very easy for someone, even in good faith, trying to present something they would like to see improved, but it being done in a way that somebody else is taking at it, they're attacking something that's very important to them. So you want to look for that and looking for ways to to build team trust. So one thing about a retrospective, and I facilitate these for teams before, but bringing in an outsider, sometimes this can be helpful. One, because you've got a neutral voice. It's not somebody that probably worked with the team during the week, so they don't have any experiences that they're bringing to this, and everybody knows that they don't have any experiences bringing to it, so they're seen as more neutral. They also may be able to get people to participate in ways that won't otherwise. It's something I've done for teams before, coming in and trying to get more people talking. It's new, different person. If I'm asking, to give an example, if I'm coming in and facilitating a retrospective for your team, and everybody knows I know nothing about the actual application or what you did in the last week, I'm just taking the things of trying to get people to communicate and talk through this. I can ask a question, and since everybody knows I wasn't there or didn't experience anything, my question is very can be seen as very innocuous and innocent, just a question that you'd ask based on the information that we got from the meeting. On the other hand, if it's somebody on the team asking the question, it's a lot easier to go, oh, well, they're asking this because of this and because of this, and what they really mean is this. So that's where, particularly if you've got teams that don't have a lot of trust, aren't communicating well, that's where having somebody else come in sometimes can be helpful. I've seen some organizations that they just borrow every once in a while, they'll borrow a scrum master from another team that's not really related to them and ask them to come in and do it just to kind of mix things up a little bit. The other thing, if you're bringing in somebody that's skilled in agility, and this is something I've helped with teams do before, is trying to steer away from bad decisions. So not necessarily telling the team what to do, but if the team's suggesting something and you've got somebody facilitating the retrospective that has a lot of experience, instead of saying, no, you shouldn't do that, that's a bad idea, you're breaking all the Agile principles, they might ask, how does this relate to the Agile principles? But they also might say, okay, what you're suggesting sounds a little bit risky, but if it didn't work, that would be great. How would we measure this? How can we do this as an experiment to see if it works, to where if it fails, we know it, but also if it succeeds, we know it. So we can know if this change is actually helping things or not. So those are some things that can sometimes bring an outsider can be helpful with. I think if you're in a situation where you feel you need an outsider to do it all the time, and the team can't ever conduct their own retros, you may be in the situation where you're only doing retrospectives when something really bad happens. But that's probably a sign that some other things need to change in the team. But sometimes bringing an outsider can be very, very helpful. What do you do with your retrospective takeaways? So somebody was asking about documenting that. And my general feeling on retrospectives is if it's important enough, you'll remember it. And if you, for some reason, forget it, it will come up in the next retrospective and you'll eventually get attention because you'll keep talking about it, keep bringing it up. That isn't to say there's never a reason to go ahead and document something. I know some people, they always create tickets for what they're going to do, whatever their experiment is, and that can be fine. But I think one thing, there's a certain amount of self-management. I think that if everybody gets together on Monday and thinks everything's a great idea to do, and then by Tuesday it's no longer the next most important thing to work on, and it falls by the wayside, that may not be the worst thing that can happen. And then maybe the next retrospective, they've got another view of it, and that's the one that really gets picked up and run with. Now, I know some people will probably think that's a horrible idea because you're wasting the outcome of the retrospective meeting. I guess it depends a lot on the team, but I think there's a certain amount of self-correcting in there. What you don't want to do is have a ticket that by the time people get ready to work on it, no one thinks it's really important, but you're just doing it because it seemed like a good idea 2 or 3 weeks ago. What I find useful in a lot of cases, instead of creating a ticket for something, is the retrospective items that we've said we're going to improve or experiments we want to do, bring those up and just mention them at the beginning of each stand-up. Like, we decided we're going to try to interface better with the security team and let them know about things ahead of time so we don't end up having to do rework later. And if I bring that up at the beginning of each stand-up, now it's in our minds as we plan our work for the day. And that can be a way of kind of guiding us to make sure we're not forgetting about it. But also it's very lightweight, and it's not saying you have to do any particular thing. It's just like, here's what we want to trend toward. So the question is, should it be on the Scrum Master to hold the team accountable for actions, items, and experiments? I think one thing, I think one thing I would think in terms of is if the Scrum Master is going to be accountable for something related to the outcomes of retrospectives, bringing them up and asking the team if it's still important and they want to do it, I think could be valuable. If the being accountable is like we decided to do this, so we're still going to do this, I think like I said, there are situations where it's no longer important. It's not that big a deal, or we got ourselves all spun up and headed in one direction just because that's what we were talking about. But now there's other things that are more important. So I think it's often helpful to have some type of ability for things to fall off the stack. Now, it depends on what it is, right? If you're launching a very expensive experiment to see how it works, then you need to keep track of it and stuff. So it depends on what you're actually having coming out of the retros. A lot of the retros, what I'm encouraging people to do is what are very small things we can do in the way that we work that if we just remind ourselves every day, we can improve instead of we're going to spend $1 million on this as an experiment and see if it works out well for us. So some of it depends on what comes out. So yes, if you've got a team that's expecting the Scrum Master to be the one responsible for action items coming out of the retro, I think that moves them away from the self-efficacy that should be coming out of a retro where people are saying, "Oh, here's what we're all going to do together to try to make everything work better." Okay, how are we doing? Okay, good. So I'm gonna go through real quick. Here's some retrospective format ideas. You've probably seen things where you've got columns for mad, glad, and sad, and you stick things up on that. Mad may not be the best word, but tipped, I don't know. Whatever. You put them up and then you put them up on the board, maybe vote for them, and then talk about the top ranking ones. So that's one way that I've seen people do it. Another one that I like a little bit better is the start, stop, continue. So here's things we want to try. And we'll force rank them and maybe decide on those maybe experiments we want to do, or just things we want to. Maybe we don't need experiments for them. It's just things we want to try doing. Things we're doing that maybe we want to try stopping, and then continue things that are working well. So, like I said, with any of these, I make sure there's some place to make sure we recognize things individuals have done, some type of kudos. I've seen this one, all the L's, right? The liked, learned, longed for, or lacked. I like this thing, asking team to come with a hypothesis for change, so we have something to measure against. It makes the meeting focused on what we can control and measure. That's great. I like that. There's also the starfish, where we've got things we want to keep, things we want to start, things we want to stop, less of something or more of something. You probably create more points on the starfish if you've got other things, but you draw this on a whiteboard, give everybody sticky notes, and then they kind of put it wherever they want. If you are artistic, there's the sailboat one. And so you've got the sun, things that make us feel warm and happy. There's the wind, things that we feel are really driving us forward. We've got the anchor, things that are slowing us down. And then we've got the big rock, which is the thing that might risks that we're going to run into in the future. You probably you can put it as sharks or things if you want to too, depending on your artistic level. And one thing I will say about it, I mentioned artistic level. You can probably get something, even if it's very rudimentary drawings, doing something like this may get people engaged that weren't engaged when you were doing a different type of retrospective, just because it looks different. Like, oh, what's that? Well, that's supposed to be the sun. Oh, okay. Well, I'll put my sticky note there. You can launch some stuff. And I think there is a certain amount of being vulnerable, saying, I'm willing to expose my art out here for people to put their sticky notes on. It doesn't have to be perfect. That can make things fun. And also that vulnerability by the person who's kind of conducting it, setting things up, can often set the stage for people to be more okay. If I see that you're willing, you can't draw a sailboat or whatever, but you're willing to give it a try, I may be more willing to speak up on things that I want to see improved. The rock's a game changer. Yeah, that's great. This is often what you end up with, something thumbs up. Maybe that's kudos, or things that went well, things that went poorly, things we want to highlight, things we need to dig into deeper. Another possible thing. Now, here's the type of retrospective that I like doing, not all the time, but occasionally, in getting people to really think in terms of the agile principles. So what I usually do is I'll give everybody on the team a set of 12 business cards that have a different agile principle on each one. And then I tell them to force rank these, like order these from the things we do the best to the things that you see that we do the worst, or at least the top three are the three things that you think we do the best at. Bottom three are the things we do the worst at, and then all the stuff in between. And they all go through and do it. And then we go through and say, okay, who had this in their top three? And we talk about it. And what's very interesting is they start as we go through it, we often see that what one person put as the thing that we're best at, somebody else put as the thing that the team's worst at. And what I really like about this retrospective is it really starts giving you a view of how the entire team sees our ability to follow the agile principles, and also things that I may see that think we're doing really really well, or have a perspective that we're doing really really well. Somebody else is saying, yeah, but there's so much more we could be doing here, and I feel we're really falling short in this area. And the nice thing about having those conversations is it gives, if I'm the one thinking we're really good in this area, it gives me the ability to see how we could improve. And maybe I've stopped paying attention to it because I think we're doing great on it. But it also gives the person who's saying, "Oh, I don't think we're doing very good at following this principle." Maybe my perspective helps them see, you know what, we're not doing so bad at this after all. Yes, we can improve, but I had forgotten about all these other aspects of things. So this is a format I like using, and it's very different because it's usually not based on exactly what happened in the last week. It's more overarching, like how's the team working within the organization and stuff. But this is one that I really really like using. Occasionally, not all the time. It's also very interesting to do with management because they tend to have a very each person managing a different area has a very different perspective, and I think that the conversations that come out it can be very productive. The other thing I like about doing that is it gives you a way that if you've got people that don't speak up, you're asking them to force rank something, and then you're saying, okay, put your hands up if this, and then you can ask them questions like, okay, you said this was the top, you said it was the bottom. What's your perspective on that? And sometimes people will speak up in that type of environment because there's not a right or wrong. They're just saying, here's why I ranked it this way. And so sometimes you get people speaking up that wouldn't speak up otherwise. Why use different formats? So different people are going to engage with different things. Also, the different things have different focus. Somebody mentioned that the rock one really gets you thinking about risks because there's a rock on there, and you see the rock and it's visual, and maybe some people will think of risks under that situation that they wouldn't if you're using the starfish or something like that. It also gives you different dimensions of how you're thinking about things. Like, for example, the thing where the force ranking that I was discussing is very focused on the dimension of the force ranking is very much how are we approaching the agile principles, where some of the others are more focused on what happened last week. So those are some ideas there. Okay, retrospective AI workflow. I think we've got just enough time to do this. So I've got and I don't think I don't know if I can share it in the chat. I will email everyone that's here out this. But I've got a workflow for retrospective, and I want to kind of see what you think of it. But first, I want to ask you, how do you feel about using AI for a retrospective? I may have poisoned the well a little bit with my thing, but not sure how you feel. Absolutely, you think it's great. Depends. I'd have to see it. Or there is no way in the world that this is a good idea. Okay, so we're probably somewhat open to AI. I'm curious what this would look like maybe 3 years ago. But we've got a range of different feelings in here. I tend to be a little bit more toward the I'm not sure this is a good idea, but with despite working in technology so much, I tend to be a little bit like this guy. So these are the Luddites. Luddites were Ned Ludd back when people were upset about manufacturing stuff. Um, they're upset about manufacturing stuff, so they wrote threatening letters to people that owned factories and things, and they usually would sign them Ned Ludd. I don't know that he was ever a real person, but that's where the term Luddite comes from. So somebody that's not maybe not so quick to jump on the technology bandwagon, different things. So that's how I've kind of approached a lot of stuff with AI, and I'm trying to be more open in experimenting with stuff. Um, but I think some of it comes down to, like I mentioned, that developer. They're saying the things that I'm really good at, it actually makes me worse at. It makes me better at things that I'm bad at. Um, and from my perspective, my concern would be, well, then maybe I won't ever get good at those things. So if it's something I never intend to do, that's great. But if it's something I actually want to gain skills in, not sure. Okay, so is this even a good idea? So here's some downsides I see of trying to use a retro AI workflow. So there's a little bit of a tendency to stop thinking, people checking out and not engaging because we're letting this run. Doesn't have to be that way, but that can happen. There's also the tendency, a lot of stuff I see with AI workflows in different areas is they'll generate lots and lots of text instead of actual understanding. So you get a lot of stuff that's very much the average of what a team would do. meaning it's probably has relevance to your team, but it's not the most important things. So depending on how it's approached, you can end up with lots of. My experience has been for a lot of teams, it's not a matter of can we come up with thousands of things we could improve. It's can we successfully identify the things that really, really matter to the team and work through that. There also is going to be missing out on nuance and personal feelings that you have. Now, in some cases, that might be a good thing because it's like it's AI, it's not out to get me, or maybe people do think it's out to get me, but kind of like bringing in an external facilitator. Now, here's some potential upsides. So it might actually highlight an area that no one had ever thought about. I've been playing around with some AI workflows for identifying impediments to flow, and it's been pretty interesting some of the stuff it's been giving back. It also might be variety, like let's try this, see what people think, and then let's talk about it. You might get people very, very engaged. I don't know. There's a video. If you haven't seen it, go and watch it. You find it at the Wall Street Journal. They let AI run their vending machine, and then everybody engaged with it, and you could chat with it and stuff. And in the end, they convinced it that it was a communist a machine, and it was giving stuff away to people. I think it also ordered a fish and a PlayStation and gave those away. And anyway, it's hilarious to watch. But man, the Wall Street Journal people were very, very engaged with this AI. So it might be interesting from that standpoint. The other last two things that I think I see as potential upside is it can be a good way for individuals to really think through things on their own. So going through an AI and saying, I'm going to do a mini retrospective on the way I'm working, or with just a few of us talking through it, and just say, what are the things that I like walking you through thinking? Because you can have conversations with it. And I think in a lot of cases, that's where AI is helpful or can be helpful, is in just going through and having a conversation rubber ducking it in some ways. There's the thing in software engineering where if you get stuck, you get out your rubber duck and explain your problem to the rubber duck, and in the process, you often solve it. And I think AI can be useful for some of those types of things. Of just saying, I need to think more deeply about this. It's going to basically be prompting me for questions, and so I'll have to dig a little bit deeper than I would just thinking on my own. It can also be a way of practicing. So you could, and what we'll look at here in just a second, is a way you can actually maybe run a retrospective on your own just to get an idea of how you want to actually conduct it if you're the one facilitating. So here's the workflow we're going to look at. And I won't go into great detail because I'm going to email this to you, but we're saying this workflow, so this should run in Gemini or ChatGPT or whatever you want, Claude, or whatever you're using. So you say, we're going to run this workflow step by step. We're telling it you're the retrospective facilitator. Your role is to guide me. The goal is to finish the entire process. So just a little bit of here's what I'm expecting this to do. Then we've got kind of introduction and how we want it to engage with us or whoever we have running this. And then we give it some steps of what we want to do, these 5 steps. We want to frame the retrospective using start, stop, continue. And when I send this to you, you could pick something else if you want and plug it in there. Gather input for the team, identify patterns, prioritize, co-design experiments or next steps, document follow-ups and accountability. And then ask if you want refresher on the retrospective formats before we begin. Then the step 1, frame the retrospective. This gives some highlights of what we're wanting it to do during that. Step 2, collect start, stop, continue inputs, some highlights from that. And we just go through, like I said, I'll email this to you, so I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time just going through this. And then, step 5, and you're done. So what I wanted to do, we'll see if this is, see how interesting this is for people, or if it's of any interest at all. Now, one thing I want to point out, when I was playing around with this, it started pulling in information from all the other chats I've had. And so it started it started coming up with lots of things to try to help me based on things I had said elsewhere. So there is a way to go in and if you're using ChatGPT up here at the top, and you can tell it to use a temporary chat. So that's what I'm going to be using here. So let me just go through this real fast. Let's see what it looks like. Okay. So we run this. And it's going to try to do its best to help me figure out things. Okay, so notice what it's doing here. It's giving me some time things for 90-minute thing. Now I could, if I said we've only got 30 minutes, I could tell it that, or 60 minutes, and it would rework based on those things. So this is it's making some suggestions here for us. So I'm going to say, I can say, I want to change this structure. Like if I want to say, no, I want to use the sailboat, or I don't have that much amount of time, I could do that. I'm going to tell it to go ahead. We'll use this structure the way it is. It wants context. So just for fun, I'm going to say is. I'm going to tell it to generate synthetic data for me, so I don't have to type a whole bunch of stuff here. So it's going to just come up with some things for us. Say it's 2 weeks. Here's our sprint goal. Evidently, we're having trouble with payment failures. And here's the whole situation of what we're running in here. So now it's suggesting how we go ahead and set things up. Some more information. So these are the things that it's saying it came up with under start, stop, and continue. Now we could have been the one providing that stuff. I find this is a useful way the synthetic data can be a very easy way to go through and say, what does my workflow do before I invest a bunch of time talking to it? So we'll say, okay, so now spot patterns and prioritize. Let's come down here. Okay, so it's walking us through everything else we can do. Okay, actually, it went ahead and I think finished stuff out through the rest of it. So anyway, what I want to point out though here is if we go through and really think about all these things that it's giving us information on, we might come up with some things in a retrospective that we might not on our own. So I'm going to send this to you. I'd love to hear back if you found it useful or not, like what ways, and modify it and do whatever you want to do with it. And see if you think it actually helps you more than it hurts you is the thing I would be interested in hearing what you have to say about. So I will email that out to everyone here just in an hour or so. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and end the presentation. I was going to do a giveaway, but I think we're at time. So I'm going to end this, and then I would love to hear if anyone in the presentation and stop